The millionaire family laughed when the son brought a poor woman to dinner, but when they found out who she really was, everyone was speechless. The Michelin-starred restaurant's exterior lights cast a warm glow against the December snow, illuminating Madison Avenue like a postcard of Manhattan luxury. Inside Le Petit Jardin, Richard Morrison adjusted his Rolex, barely tasting the $400 wine that the sommelier had recommended. Another lonely dinner. Another attempt to fill the void his daughter Sophia had left 3 years ago when she'd stormed out of his life, leaving nothing but bitter words and unanswered questions. At 62, Richard had everything money could buy: a successful real estate empire, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, properties scattered across 3 continents. Yet tonight, like every night, he found himself analyzing every mistake he'd made as a father, wondering if wealth had been his greatest downfall in raising Sophia. The commotion outside broke through his melancholy. Through the frosted windows, he saw a small crowd gathering on the sidewalk. Richard's security training kicked in, old habits from his early days when he'd built his company from nothing. Something about the scene felt wrong. "Call 911, he instructed the maitre d' as he rushed outside, his expensive wool coat forgotten on the chair. The young woman lay crumpled on the icy sidewalk, one hand protectively cradled around her heavily pregnant belly. Her clothes were worn but clean, a summer jacket completely inadequate for the brutal New York winter, and shoes patched with duct tape. Despite her unconscious state, her face bore a quiet dignity that struck Richard to his core. "Stand back, give her air," Richard commanded, his authoritative voice parting the crowd of onlookers. He knelt beside her, checking her pulse while avoiding moving her. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing deep brown eyes clouded with confusion and fear. "The baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, my baby." "An ambulance is coming," Richard assured her, shrugging off his suit jacket to cover her. "I'm Richard. What's your name?" "Adelaide," she managed, trying to sit up. "Adelaide Curtis. I'm fine, really. I just got dizzy." She struggled to rise but swayed dangerously. "Easy there," Richard steadied her. "When's the last time you ate, Adelaide?" The flush of shame that colored her cheeks told him everything. Up close, he could see how thin her face was, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her collarbones protruded above the neckline of her threadbare sweater. This wasn't just someone down on their luck. This was someone fighting for survival. The wail of approaching sirens filled the air. Adelaide's eyes widened with panic. "No hospital, please. I can't afford. I'll be fine." "The baby needs to be checked," Richard said firmly, recognizing the fear in her eyes. He'd seen it countless times in his charity work with homeless youth. "I'll handle any expenses." "Why would you do that?" Adelaide asked, her voice mixing suspicion with desperate hope. Richard met her gaze, seeing something in this young woman that reminded him painfully of Sophia. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because I suspect you've got quite a story to tell." The paramedics arrived, efficiently transferring Adelaide to a stretcher. Richard found himself following the ambulance in his car, calling his personal physician to meet them at New York Presbyterian. He couldn't explain the pull he felt to help this stranger, but something about Adelaide's situation nagged at his instincts. In the emergency room, watching through the glass as doctors examined Adelaide, Richard's phone buzzed. Another missed call from his private investigator, the monthly update on Sophia's whereabouts. He'd hired the best to track her, but she'd vanished completely 8 months ago. 8 months. Richard's breath caught as he studied Adelaide's profile through the window. The timeline, the resemblance around the eyes. He shook his head, dismissing the wild speculation. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was about to change everything he thought he knew about family, forgiveness, and the true cost of redemption. The doctor emerged from Adelaide's room, her expression grave. "Mr. Morrison, we need to discuss your friend's condition. And there's something else you should know." Richard sank into the plastic hospital chair, the doctor's words echoing in his mind. Adelaide's condition was worse than he'd imagined. Severe malnutrition, dangerously low blood pressure, and signs of prolonged exposure to the elements. But it was the other detail that had sent his world spinning. The baby's estimated conception date coincided exactly with the last time he'd seen Sophia. Mr. Morrison? Adelaide's quiet voice drew him from his thoughts. She looked impossibly young lying in the hospital bed, drowning in a standard-issue gown, and 4 dripping vital fluids into her arm. You didn't have to stay. Please, call me Richard. He pulled his chair closer, noting how she instinctively tensed. Adelaide, I want to help, but I need to understand your situation. Why were you sleeping in the park? She twisted the thin blanket between her fingers, pride warring with desperation on her face. I lost my job at the diner in Portland when I started showing. Couldn't make rent. I've been moving east, trying to… She trailed off, blinking back tears. Trying to what? Trying to find the baby's father. The words came out in a rush. Or rather, his family. He died in a motorcycle accident before I could tell him about the pregnancy. Richard's heart thundered in his chest. This happened in Portland, Oregon? Adelaide nodded, her hand protectively covering her belly. I was a waitress at Mason's diner. He came in every morning for 2 weeks. Said he was just passing through, trying to find himself after a family falling out. Her eyes took on a faraway look. He was kind, funny, played guitar at the local bars sometimes. We spent one amazing weekend together. And then, what was his name? Richard barely recognized his own voice. Lucas. Adelaide's expression softened with memory. Lucas Reynolds. But I found out later it was a fake name. When I finally tracked down details about the accident, his real ID said, Lucas Morrison. Richard finished, his throat tight. My daughter Sophia's twin brother. The color drained from Adelaide's face. Twin? He never mentioned. They were inseparable growing up. When Lucas died 3 years ago, Sophia blamed me. Said if I hadn't pushed him so hard to join the family business, he wouldn't have rebelled, wouldn't have taken that motorcycle trip. Richard ran a hand over his face, decades of guilt weighing on his shoulders. She left right after the funeral. I've been searching for her ever since. Adelaide's monitors beeped steadily in the heavy silence that followed. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. That's why I came east. I found an old news article about the Morrison family about you. I thought his family should know about the baby, but when I got to New York, I couldn't. She gestured helplessly at her worn clothes. How could I walk into Morrison Enterprises looking like this? Who would believe me? Richard studied her face, seeing now the subtle hints of Lucas in the baby's ultrasound image pinned to her chart. His grandson, the last piece of his son. I believe you, he said softly, and I think I know why Sophia disappeared 8 months ago. She must have somehow found out about the baby. Adelaide's brow furrowed. But how? I never told anyone except… Except who? My best friend back in Portland, Rachel Martinez. She's a nurse at Providence Hospital. Adelaide's eyes widened. She had access to medical records. If Sophia came looking for information about Lucas's last days, Richard was already pulling out his phone, dialing his private investigator. Check Providence Hospital in Portland. Look for any connection to Sophia Morrison around 8 months ago. He turned back to Adelaide, decision made. I have a proposition for you. I own a brownstone in the Upper West Side. Fully furnished, excellent security, close to the best hospitals in the city. It's yours until the baby comes. I couldn't possibly. You're carrying my grandchild, Richard said firmly. But more than that, you might be the key to finding Sophia. She's out there somewhere, possibly watching, definitely hurting. And I think she led you here for a reason. Adelaide stared at him for a long moment, one hand still resting on her belly. Outside the window, snow was falling again, blanketing the city in white. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but I want to help find her too. She deserves to know her nephew. Or niece, Richard smiled, feeling hope for the first time in years. His phone buzzed. The PI already had information. As Richard reached for it, he noticed Adelaide's heart rate rising on the monitor. Richard, she gasped, face contorted in pain. Something's wrong. The baby? The monitors erupted in urgent beeping as Adelaide doubled over, and Richard lunged for the call button, praying he hadn't found this connection to his family, only to lose it again. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of medical terms and worried consultations. Richard hadn't left the hospital, working from his laptop in Adelaide's room while doctors monitored her condition. The preterm contractions had been stopped, but her body's undernourished state remained a serious concern. "Your blood pressure is finally stabilizing," Dr. Catherine Chen announced, reviewing Adelaide's latest charts. "But I want you on bed rest for at least 2 more weeks. Any more stress could trigger early labor." Richard watched Adelaide's face fall at the news. She'd been anxious to start searching for Sophia, convinced that time was running out. He understood the feeling. His PI's latest report burned a hole in his pocket, filled with tantalizing new details about his daughter's movements. "I've arranged everything at the brownstone," Richard assured her once Dr. Chen left. "Full-time nurse, security team, weekly visits from Dr. Chen herself. You won't want for anything." Adelaide shifted uncomfortably against her pillows. "It feels wrong, accepting so much. I never meant to." "To what?" "To give me hope of connecting with my grandchild? To provide a chance of finding my daughter?" Richard's voice softened. "Adelaide, you've given me purpose again. Let me do this." She studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Tell me about them. Lucas and Sophia. I want to understand." Richard moved to the window, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over Manhattan. They were born fighters, came 2 months early, spent weeks in the NICU. Their mother, Caroline, used to say they shared one soul between them. He smiled at the memory. Lucas was the dreamer, always with a guitar in his hands, head full of songs and stories. Sophia was the practical one, top of her class, determined to prove herself in the business world. What happened to their mother? Cancer. When they were 12, Richard's reflection looked suddenly older in the darkened window. "I threw myself into work after that, thinking if I could just build something big enough, secure enough, they'd never face the struggles I did growing up. Instead, I pushed them away." Adelaide's monitor beeped steadily in the thoughtful silence that followed. "Lucas told me once that music was the only thing that made him feel truly alive. I didn't understand then what he was running from." The night he left, Sophia caught him packing his motorcycle. Richard turned back to face her. She called me, frantic. I said all the wrong things, threatened to cut him off, demanded he think about his future. Sophia hung up on me. An hour later, Lucas was gone. 3 days after that, the accident, Adelaide finished quietly. Sophia was devastated. She took over his position at the company, worked herself to exhaustion. I thought it was her way of grieving." Richard pulled out his phone, showing Adelaide a photo. This was taken 2 weeks before she disappeared. Adelaide leaned forward, studying the image of a striking young woman with Lucas's same dark hair and determined set to her jaw. But it was her eyes that caught Adelaide's attention, haunted, hiding something. "Wait." Adelaide squinted at the photo. "What's that on her desk?" Richard zoomed in on the image. Behind a stack of papers sat a familiar-looking coffee mug with the Mason's Diner logo. "She was in Portland," Adelaide breathed. "She must have traced Lucas's last movements, found the diner." "Mr. Morrison?" A nurse appeared in the doorway. "There's a Rachel Martinez here to see Ms. Curtis. She says she flew in from Portland." Adelaide's face lit up, then quickly fell as she registered Richard's sharp look. "Rachel? But I never told her I was here." "Send her in," Richard said firmly, positioning himself between Adelaide's bed and the door. Something about this surprise visit set off warning bells in his mind. The woman who entered was young, professional-looking, and visibly nervous. "Adelaide, thank God you're okay. I've been so worried since you left, and when I saw the news article about a pregnant woman collapsing outside Le Petit Jardin, I just knew." "How did you know it was Le Petit Jardin?" Richard interrupted quietly. "The press release didn't specify which restaurant." Rachel froze, color draining from her face. Behind her, Richard's security team silently filled the doorway. "Because," came a familiar voice from the hallway. "I told her where to find you." Richard's heart stopped as Sophia stepped into view, older and thinner than in his photo, but unmistakably his daughter. She met his gaze with years of unspoken pain and determination. "Hello, Dad," she said softly. "I think it's time we all talked about Lucas." Adelaide's monitors began beeping faster as tension filled the room. Outside, a winter storm gathered strength, trapping them all together with their secrets and the weight of truths about to be revealed. The hospital room crackled with tension as Sophia took a measured step inside. Rachel hovered uncertainly by the door, looking between the gathered faces like she was watching a bomb about to detonate. "Your security team can stand down, Dad," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because Adelaide deserves the whole truth." Richard studied his daughter, cataloging the changes 3 years had carved into her face. The polished corporate executive was gone, replaced by someone harder, more haunted. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, her dark hair cut short, a deliberate rejection of her old life. "Adelaide needs rest," he began, but Adelaide cut him off. "No, I need answers." She struggled to sit up straighter in the hospital bed. "You've been watching me, haven't you? Since Portland?" Sophia's expression softened as she looked at Adelaide. "Not exactly. Rachel has been watching out for you. I've been following a different trail. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private," Richard suggested, acutely aware of the hospital staff peering curiously through the door's window. "Fine." Sophia pulled out her phone, typing quickly. "I've booked a private consultation room down the hall. But first..." She turned to Rachel. "Show them." Rachel pulled a thick manila envelope from her bag, hands shaking slightly as she passed it to Richard. "I'm sorry for the deception, Mr. Morrison, but after what we discovered..." Richard opened the envelope, spreading its contents across Adelaide's rolling table. Medical records, police reports, and photographs spilled out. At the center lay a death certificate. Lucas's death certificate. "The motorcycle accident was staged," Sophia said quietly. "Lucas didn't die 3 years ago. At least, not then." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Adelaide's monitor began beeping more rapidly as she reached for the documents with trembling fingers. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I saw the news reports. The crashed bike, the funeral. You saw what certain people wanted everyone to see." Sophia's voice carried years of carefully controlled rage. "Lucas was running from something bigger than family expectations, Dad. He discovered irregularities in the Morrison Enterprises books, shell companies, missing millions, patterns that pointed to extensive money laundering." Richard sank heavily into the chair beside Adelaide's bed. "That's impossible. I oversee every major transaction personally. Through Vice President Carlton Phillips." Sophia's smile was razor-sharp. "The same Carlton Phillips who disappeared 2 months before Lucas died. The same man whose private yacht was photographed in Portland 8 months ago." Adelaide's face had gone chalk white. "The man at the diner," she breathed. "The older gentleman who kept watching Lucas. He threatened me after Lucas disappeared. Said if I ever came looking." "Carlton Phillips," Sophia confirmed grimly. "Lucas wasn't running away that night, Dad. He was gathering evidence. The motorcycle crash was meant to silence him, but he survived. The hospital records were falsified, and he was moved in secret. Rachel helped him disappear." Rachel stepped forward, her professional demeanor cracking. "He was my patient after the crash. When he told me what he knew, showed me the proof, I couldn't let them finish what they started. So I helped him create a new identity. But the weekend we spent together," Adelaide's voice broke, "was any of it real?" "All of it," Sophia assured her quickly. "Lucas wasn't supposed to stay in Portland, wasn't supposed to risk being recognized. But he fell in love with you, Adelaide. And when he realized you were pregnant, he tried to come forward," Richard finished, the pieces clicking into horrible place. "That's why Phillips resurfaced in Portland." Sophia nodded, tears finally breaking through her composed facade. "Lucas contacted me, said he was ready to expose everything. He had all the evidence backed up, ready to send to the FBI. He just wanted to make things right first, to tell Adelaide the truth. I was supposed to meet him that night, help him get Adelaide somewhere safe before everything broke. But Phillips got to him first." The meaning behind her words hung heavy in the air. Adelaide let out a soft sound of distress, one hand protectively covering her belly. This time, Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. "The death certificate is real." Richard stood abruptly, decades of business instincts warring with the devastating personal implications. We need to get Adelaide out of here. If Phillips knows she's connected to me. Already handled, Sophia said. I have a safe house ready, private medical staff, completely off the grid. Rachel will help coordinate the transfer. No. Adelaide's voice was surprisingly firm. I'm tired of running, of hiding. This baby is all that's left of Lucas. He died trying to expose the truth. We owe it to him to finish what he started. Sophia and Richard exchanged a look, the first moment of understanding they'd shared in years. Outside, the winter storm howled against the windows, but inside the hospital room, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that would either tear the remaining pieces of their family apart or forge them into something stronger. Adelaide's right, Sophia said finally. But first, Dad, you need to hear everything. About Phillips, about the night Lucas really died, and about why I've spent the last 8 months building a case that will bring down half of Morrison Enterprises' board of directors. Richard looked between his daughter and Adelaide, seeing the same determination in both their faces, the same fight for justice that Lucas had died protecting. He reached for his phone. Let me make one call first, he said quietly. It's time to wake up my private security team, all of them. The Private Security Command Center occupied the entire 40th floor of Morrison Tower, a stark contrast to the wood-paneled elegance of the executive offices above. Adelaide sat in an ergonomic chair specially brought in for her, watching dozens of screens display surveillance feeds from across Manhattan. 2 days had passed since Sophia's revelations, and the pieces were moving quickly now. Carlton Phillips was spotted at JFK this morning, announced Marcus Waite, Richard's head of security. The gruff former FBI agent tapped a grainy image on the main screen. He's back in New York. Of course he is, Sophia said grimly, pacing behind Adelaide's chair. He knows we're closing in. The encrypted files Lucas left behind? They're a roadmap to every illegal transaction, every shell company, every bride. The final piece was just delivered to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Richard stood at the windows, his reflection ghostly against the evening skyline. He'd barely slept since learning the truth about his company's corruption, dedicating every waking moment to cooperating with federal investigators. The dark circles under his eyes matched Sophia's. The warrant for Phillips will be issued tomorrow morning, he said quietly, but that gives him tonight to tie up loose ends. Adelaide instinctively pressed a hand to her belly, feeling a fierce kick in response. The baby had been more active lately, as if sensing the mounting tension. Dr. Chun had cleared her to leave the hospital, but only under strict monitoring. The private medical suite Richard had installed 2 floors down included everything needed in case of early labor. He won't get anywhere near you, Sophia assured her, resting a protective hand on Adelaide's shoulder. The gesture reminded Adelaide painfully of Lucas. They had the same instinct to guard what they loved. It's not me I'm worried about, Adelaide replied. This man destroyed your family once already. I won't let him do it again. Rachel emerged from the adjacent communications room, still wearing her hospital scrubs from her shift. She'd taken a leave of absence from Providence Hospital to help coordinate Adelaide's medical care, but Adelaide suspected her friend was also avoiding questions back in Portland about her role in Lucas's disappearance. The safe house in Connecticut is ready, Rachel reported. Private access road, full medical facilities, completely off the grid. No. Richard turned from the window, his expression set. Running is what he expects. It's time to end this. Sophia stopped pacing. Dad, your brother died trying to expose this corruption. Richard's voice cracked slightly. He died protecting the integrity of the company your grandfather built, the legacy that was meant to keep this family safe. I won't dishonor that sacrifice by hiding. Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes, remembering Lucas's passionate voice as he told her about his family's history one starlit night in Portland. How his grandfather had started Morrison Enterprises with nothing but determination and a loan from the GI Bill. How he'd wanted to make things right, to restore what had been tarnished. The baby kicked again, harder this time. Adelaide winced, shifting in her chair. Everything okay? Rachel asked sharply, medical training kicking in. Just active tonight, Adelaide assured her, but something felt different. A persistent ache had been building in her lower back for the past hour. Marcus's phone buzzed. His expression darkened as he read the message. Phillips just used his private elevator key. He's in the building. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Security teams moved into position, communications channels crackled with updates, and Rachel quickly checked Adelaide's vital signs. "Get them to the medical suite," Richard ordered. "Marcus, coordinate with FBI liaison. Phillips doesn't leave this building unless it's in handcuffs." "Dad, wait." Sophia grabbed his arm. "You don't have to confront him alone. We just got this family back together." Richard cupped his daughter's face with one hand, the gesture bridging years of misunderstanding. Sometimes protecting family means standing your ground. He looked past her to Adelaide. "Keep them safe." As security personnel ushered them toward the private elevator, Adelaide felt liquid warmth trickle down her leg. Her gasp drew everyone's attention. "Rachel," she managed through suddenly clenched teeth. I think the baby's coming." The elevator doors slid open just as Adelaide's first real contraction hit. Through the haze of pain, she saw Richard and Sophia exchange one last look before the doors closed between them. Above, Carlton Phillips was ascending toward his final confrontation with the Morrison family. Below, a new Morrison was preparing to enter the world, ready or not. Thunder crashed outside the tower's windows, and Adelaide gripped Sophia's hand as another contraction built. The storm that had been gathering for 3 years was about to break, and none of them could predict who would be left standing when it cleared. The medical suite's monitors cast a blue glow across Adelaide's face as another contraction peaked. Rachel moved efficiently around her, checking readings and adjusting equipment while Sophia maintained a steady stream of updates through her earpiece. 6 minutes apart now, Rachel announced, her professional calm betrayed by the tension in her shoulders. "But your blood pressure's climbing. We need to slow things down." Adelaide nodded through gritted teeth, trying to focus on her breathing techniques. The baby was coming too early, barely 34 weeks. Above them, somewhere in the towering skeleton of Morrison Enterprises, Richard was facing the man who had torn this family apart. "Movement on 48, Sophia reported, pacing near the door where 2 armed security guards stood watch. Phillips disabled the camera feeds, but he's heading for Dad's office. A particularly sharp contraction doubled Adelaide forward. When it passed, she grabbed Sophia's wrist. "Your father? He's not really planning to just talk to Phillips, is he?" The look that crossed Sophia's face confirmed Adelaide's fears. "Dad's wearing a wire. FBI tactical teams are in position, but they can't move until Phillips incriminates himself." She ran a hand through her short hair, a gesture so like Lucas it made Adelaide's heart ache. "Which means Dad has to keep him talking?" Thunder rattled the reinforced windows. The storm that had been threatening all day was finally breaking over Manhattan, sheets of rain distorting the city lights below. Rachel frowned at the fetal monitor. "Baby's showing signs of distress. Adelaide, I need you to turn on your left side." As they helped her shift position, Adelaide caught fragments of radio chatter from Sophia's earpiece. "Subject approaching executive floor. Maintain positions, waiting for signal." Another contraction built, stronger than before. Adelaide squeezed her eyes shut, remembering the last time she'd seen Lucas. He'd promised to come back, to explain everything. Instead, she'd spent months alone, carrying his child, unaware of the dangerous threads of corruption and revenge weaving around her. "Wait!" Sophia suddenly held up one hand, pressing her earpiece closer. "Something's wrong. Phillips isn't alone." Above their heads, muffled through layers of corporate infrastructure, 3 distinct sounds punctuated the storm. 2 sharp cracks, followed by breaking glass. "Shots fired," crackled through the earpiece. 48th floor. "Officer down." Adelaide's heart monitor spiked as Sophia sprinted for the door, but Rachel caught her arm. "You can't go up there. That's my father." Sophia's voice cracked with desperation. "And this is your brother's child," Rachel countered firmly. "Lucas trusted me to protect them both. Adelaide needs you here." As if to emphasize the point, Adelaide cried out as the strongest contraction yet ripped through her. The baby's heart rate dipped dangerously on the monitor. "Rachel," Adelaide gasped when she could speak again. "Something's wrong. It feels different." Rachel's professional mask slipped for just a moment as she checked the readings. "The baby's in distress. We need to prep for an emergency C-section." Sophia stood frozen between the door and Adelaide's bed, torn between family past and family future. Above, chaos erupted through her earpiece. Subject heading to south stairwell, multiple injuries, backup needed. Sophia, Adelaide reached for her hand, breathing through another wave of pain. Lucas would want you to stay. Please. Thunder cracked again as Sophia made her decision, moving to Adelaide's side just as Rachel began assembling her surgical team. The baby's monitor continued its erratic rhythm, each beat echoing the footsteps of a desperate man fleeing upstairs. Through the rain-streaked windows, the emergency lights began flashing in the streets below. Federal agents and NYPD vehicles converged on Morrison Tower like antibodies fighting an infection. Somewhere in the building's steel and glass arteries, Richard Morrison was either dead or alive, and a lifetime of corruption was finally facing judgment. Okay, Adelaide, Rachel's voice cut through the chaos as she prepared for the procedure. We're going to meet this baby now. Sophia, I need you to. The lights went out. For 3 heartbeats, they were plunged into total darkness before the emergency generators kicked in, equipment humming back to life. But in those seconds of blackness, they all heard it. The sound of the stairwell door opening. Don't move, a familiar voice commanded as Carlton Phillips stepped into the dim light. Gun trained steadily on Sophia. Blood stained one sleeve of his expensive suit, and his signature corporate calm had been replaced by something desperate and dangerous. Nobody else needs to die tonight. Rachel moved to shield Adelaide as another contraction peaked. But Phillips's next words froze them all. Unless, of course, you're as stubborn as your brother was. The medical suite's emergency lights cast harsh shadows across Phillips's face, deepening the lines of a man who'd spent decades hiding behind corporate respectability. Blood dripped steadily from his sleeve onto the polished floor, each drop marking time with Adelaide's ragged breathing. Your father made the same choice Lucas did, Phillips said, his gun unwavering. Couldn't just let it go. Had to play the hero. His smile turned cruel. At least he'll have an impressive view of the city from the broken window of his office. Sophia's whole body tensed, but her voice remained steady. You're lying. Am I? Richard Morrison was always too focused on his precious legacy to see the bigger picture. Just like your brother. Phillips took a step closer, his shoes leaving bloody prints on the floor. Did Lucas tell you about that night in Portland, Adelaide? How he begged for your life when we found him? Promised to disappear forever if we left you alone? Adelaide's next contraction hit just then, her cry of pain mixing with a violent crack of thunder. The baby's heart monitor began its warning tone again as Rachel tried to check the readings while keeping herself between Phillips and her patient. She needs emergency surgery, Rachel said firmly. The baby won't survive if. The baby is the only loose end left. Phillips cut her off. The last piece of evidence linking everything back to me. Once the child is gone, it's my word against a dead man's. And Morrison Enterprises has very good lawyers. Sophia shifted slightly, positioning herself to lunge if needed. Our father built this company to help people, to create something lasting, and you turned it into your personal criminal empire. Your father, Philip spat, was a fool who never understood how the real world works. Business isn't about legacy, it's about power, money, control. His hand tightened on the gun. Now step away from the bed. No. The word came from Adelaide, stronger than seemed possible through her pain. She struggled to sit up straighter, one hand protectively curved around her belly. You've taken enough from this family. Brave words from a waitress who got herself knocked up by the wrong man. Phillips took another step forward. Lucas should have learned his place, just like you should learn yours. But Adelaide wasn't looking at Phillips anymore. Her eyes were fixed on something beyond him, something that made her smile through her tears. You want to talk about legacy? A new voice rang out from the doorway. Let's talk about it. Phillips spun around to find Richard Morrison standing there, very much alive despite the blood staining his torn suit. Behind him, the corridor filled with the red dots of laser sights as FBI tactical teams moved into position. Impossible, Phillips whispered. I saw you fall. The thing about legacy, Richard continued calmly, is that it teaches you to plan ahead. Bulletproof glass in every executive office. Panic buttons under every desk. His voice hardened. "And security cameras in every stairwell, recording your confession about my son's murder." Phillips raised his gun with a snarl, but Sophia was already moving. She crashed into him just as Adelaide screamed. This time, not from a contraction. Rachel's voice cut through the chaos. "The baby's coming now." 2 shots rang out in quick succession. Phillips crumpled to the floor, his gun skittering away as federal agents swarmed the room. But Rachel's urgent voice rose above the commotion. "She's hemorrhaging. I need this room cleared except for medical personnel, immediately." Richard rushed to Adelaide's side as she gripped his hand with supernatural strength. "Don't leave," she gasped. "Lucas would want you both here." Sophia appeared on her other side, still shaking with adrenaline but focused entirely on Adelaide now. "We're not going anywhere." Outside, red and blue lights continued to pulse through the storm as federal agents led Phillips away in handcuffs. Inside, another kind of storm was reaching its peak as Rachel and her team worked to bring Lucas's child safely into the world. "Almost there," Rachel encouraged as she worked. "One more push, Adelaide. Your baby's almost here." Adelaide gathered her remaining strength, drew in a deep breath, and pushed, channeling all the pain, all the loss, all the love of the past 9 months into this final moment. Through the windows, a brief break in the storm allowed a shaft of moonlight to pierce the clouds, illuminating the scene in an almost ethereal glow. And then, cutting through the diminishing thunder like a declaration of new life, came the sound they'd all been waiting for. The first fierce cry of Lucas Morrison's child. "It's a girl," Rachel announced, tears in her eyes as she placed the tiny but perfect baby on Adelaide's chest. "She's small, but she's fighting, just like her father." Richard and Sophia leaned in together, their own tears falling freely now as they watched Adelaide cradle her daughter. In her tiny features, they could all see echoes of Lucas, the same determined set to her jaw, the same fighter's spirit that had brought them all to this moment. "What's her name?" Sophia whispered, gently touching her niece's tiny hand. Adelaide looked up at the 2 people who had become her family through tragedy and triumph, through secrets and salvation. Outside, the storm was finally passing, leaving behind a cleaned and quieted city. "Hope," Adelaide said softly. "Hope Morrison." 6 months later, the rooftop garden of Morrison Tower bloomed with spring flowers, transforming the corporate skyline into something softer, more hopeful. Adelaide sat in the afternoon sunshine, watching Hope sleep peacefully in her carrier. At 6 months old, she was thriving, her early arrival nothing more than a distant memory as she grew stronger each day. "There's my favorite girls," Richard called softly, emerging from the elevator with a stack of papers under his arm. The past months had restored something vital in him, the weight of secrets replaced by the lighter burden of redemption. "How was the board meeting?" Adelaide asked, making room for him on the bench. Since Phillips's arrest and the subsequent federal investigation, Morrison Enterprises had undergone a complete transformation. Richard and Sophia had worked tirelessly to rebuild the company's integrity, starting with a foundation dedicated to corporate transparency in Lucas's name. Unanimous vote in favor of the new Ethical Oversight Committee. Richard gently touched Hope's cheek as she slept. "The Morrison Legacy Foundation will have full autonomy to investigate any suspicious activity. No more shadows for corruption to hide in." Adelaide smiled, remembering Lucas's dreams of making things right. He would be proud of this, of all of it. The elevator dinged again as Sophia arrived, carrying takeout bags from their favorite deli. She'd finally grown her hair out again, looking more like the photos from before Lucas's death, but with a hard-won wisdom in her eyes. "Rachel called from Portland," she announced, setting out their lunch. "The support program for whistleblowers is officially launched. Full legal protection and relocation services for anyone brave enough to speak up about corporate corruption. Like father, like daughter," Richard said quietly, watching Sophia arrange the food with the same meticulous attention she brought to everything. "Both of you fighting for what's right, just in different ways." Hope stirred in her carrier, tiny fists stretching toward the sky as she woke. Her eyes, when they opened, were pure Lucas, that same spark of determination and gentle humor that had first drawn Adelaide to him that rainy morning in Portland. "I've been thinking," Adelaide said, lifting Hope into her arms, "about the future, about what we tell her when she's old enough to ask about her father." Sophia sat down across from them, her expression softening as Hope reached for her aunt's finger. "We tell her the truth, that her father was a hero who gave everything to protect what was right, that his love for her was so strong it brought this whole family back together. And we tell her about the legacy she carries," Richard added, "not just of wealth or business success, but of courage, of choosing what's right over what's easy." Adelaide looked out over the city, remembering that desperate night 6 months ago when she thought she had nothing left. Now, surrounded by the family she'd found through loss and love, she understood what Lucas had been fighting for all along. Speaking of legacy, Sophia reached into her bag, pulling out an old leather journal. "I found this in Lucas's things. I think it's time Hope had it." Adelaide's hands trembled as she opened the journal, recognizing Lucas's flowing handwriting. Inside were songs, poems, and letters, including one dated just days before his death, addressed to his unborn child. "My dearest little one, I don't know if you'll be a boy or a girl, if you'll have your mother's grace or my stubborn streak, but I know you'll be loved. By Adelaide, whose strength amazes me every day. By Sophia, who'll teach you to stand up for what's right. And by our father, who I wish could know how much I understand him now. Life isn't about the name you carry or the wealth you build. It's about the hearts you touch, the wrongs you right, and the love you leave behind. That's the true Morrison legacy, one I hope you'll be proud to carry forward. With endless love." Your dad, Hope cooed softly, reaching for the page as if she could feel the love contained in those words. Above them, a spring breeze carried the scent of new flowers, and somewhere, Adelaide was sure, Lucas was smiling. Richard cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rough. "The Morrison Legacy Foundation needs a trustee to oversee its charitable works, someone with both business sense and a compassionate heart." He looked at Adelaide. "Would you consider taking the position?" Adelaide looked down at Hope, then back at the family she'd found in the most unexpected way. In their faces, she saw not just Lucas's features, but his spirit, the desire to make the world better, to protect what matters most. "Yes," she said simply. "For Hope, for Lucas, for all of us." Sophia raised her coffee cup in a toast. "To the Morrison legacy. To family," Richard added. "To love," Adelaide finished, holding Hope close as the spring sun warmed them all. Around them, the rooftop garden bloomed with new life, much like the family gathered there. Wounded by the past but healing together, stronger for having been broken, united by a legacy of love that transcended blood and time and loss. In Hope's tiny features, they could all see the future they'd fought so hard to protect. A future built on truth, justice, and the kind of love that changes everything it touches. The story that had begun with a desperate woman collapsing outside a restaurant had come full circle, transforming into something none of them could have imagined. Not an ending, but a beginning of healing, of purpose, and of a legacy that would ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the walls of Morrison Tower. Hope gurgled happily in the sunshine, reaching for all of them at once, too young to know she was the miracle that had brought them together, but somehow understanding she was exactly where she belonged.